and thank you for joining our teaching for 21st century brought to you by the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the Glazov Gang. I'm your host, Annie Cyrus. Please use the Q&A box on your screen if you have any questions, and I promise we will get to answer them as soon as our very special guest presentation is done. With that being said, I have counted moments today for this very special moment that is personal to me. Our very special guest this evening is Dr. Bill Warner. He is my personal hero, and I know many others. That aside, he is a respected expert on political Islam as an international speaker, author, and video blogger. He is also the founder of the Center for the Study of Political Islam and the Center for the Study of Political Islam International. Dr. Warner, what an honor to have you on tonight.
What a delight for me to be here because you're one of my personal heroes as well. So I guess we have a mutual admiration society.
Oh gosh, thank you. I appreciate that. We have everyone on the edge of their seats, including myself, to hear your thoughts. So floor is yours.
Well, I wanted to talk about censorship because I'm nearly 80 years old. And one of the experiences that I've had in my life, particularly intellectually, is to see the biggest change has been the rise in censorship. I grew up in America and freedom of speech was just taken for granted. I mean, everybody could say what they wanted to say. They may get angry, but you could say whatever you wanted to say. But we're seeing today the censorship is really terrible. And I thought I would illustrate a little bit about this censorship by just telling you my own personal story. I got into this, what I call the game of political Islam because I was a scientist. And on 9/11, I'd been reading about Islam for a long time. And so I made it my task as a scientist to make Quran, Sirah, Hadith easy to understand so that anyone could see what Muhammad and Allah said, good or bad. So I wanted to also, as a professor, I wanted to put together a teaching method. And so I put together a four-stage teaching method so that you could teach it yourself. So that's who I am in terms of how I got into doing this. Now, before censorship, and there was a time before censorship, as a subject matter expert, I traveled over Canada, England, United States, Czech Republic, Denmark, Germany, Austria, Serbia, Macedonia, Slovakia, Kosovo, Poland, and Israel. I spoke at the Danish Parliament and the German Bundestag. I advised European Union Parliament members, politicians, heads of intelligence. Let me pause right here. One of the scariest things I did on this trip through the Balkans was to speak with some intelligence officers, indeed the head of intelligence. Spent an hour and a half with one over lunch. I was horrified at the lack of knowledge this man has. I couldn't believe it. So I tried to educate him as much as I could in a setting, but when I left, I realized we have a very big problem. Then one day I got a telephone call from a man who identified himself as a law officer. And he said he wanted to meet with me. I said, am I in trouble? He said, no, you're not in trouble at all, but I need to talk to you. So I met with this gentleman at a bar that served pork barbecue. It turned out we had several meetings and every one of them occurred at a bar with served pork barbecue. And I said, what's the deal? Because police don't call me. He said, well, you're now achieving a high profile and we have some concern for your safety. So we want you to know that we're watching your back. Well, that's kind of good, but on the other hand, it's kind of puts a bad day in your life when police are telling you they're having to watch out for your safety. But here's my point. Before I became a racist, hater, bigot, Islamophobe, I was respectable. I was like an ordinary guy. Now then, before censorship, and I had a great life. YouTube had millions of views on my Why We Are Afraid, and indeed I got several emails from YouTube wanting to talk to me. I ignored them until finally my office phone rang and they said, look, we want to talk to you. Says you're making good videos, but says you don't know, you're making videos that are watched a lot, but you don't know anything about making videos. So we want to help you. So for 6 weeks, I had a personal person that would answer my phone and to give me advice. So this was really nice. Then Amazon, my book on Sharia law was #1 bestseller. I sold tens of thousands. On Google, if you Google the term political Islam, you got the first 4 screens were all mine. Now that seems impossible, but I created the term political Islam and it was becoming popular, but not so popular, but while I dominated all the search results. So interviews poured in, lecture invites poured in. The future was so bright I had to wear sunglasses. It was good. Then it changed, and it changed like a thunderclap. The Tennessean is the largest newspaper, back when we had newspapers. Actually, we still do, but they're not very powerful. In this day, they were powerful. There was an article that appeared on the front page of the Sunday edition above the fold, picking me out and saying that I was a racist, a bigot, and I hated Muslims. Well, that's a kick in the stomach, let me tell you, when you read about yourself on the front page of the newspaper and know that everyone else is reading it as well. Well, I thought, what to do? Well, then they came back with another front page edition, then another one. And a friend of mine who is in public relations says, Bill, I've never seen anybody who could get so much coverage. I said, how do you turn it off? But it didn't turn off, it just kept going. But they were just calling me names. So, whatever. When I was young, there was a little poem, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. So they're calling me names, so what? Well, the what came with the Southern Poverty Law Center. They said I was a racist, hater, bigot. They didn't call me an Islamophobe because the word wasn't invented yet. And at one time, I was one of the top 10 bigots in the United States. Top 10. Who knew I'd make a top 10 list of anything in the US, but here I was. It turned out my hatred was so powerful that the Southern Poverty Law Center said that Nashville was a hate city. And so here I was, a common, ordinary person, and now I'd transformed 1 million people into haters. I didn't know I had that kind of power, but evidently I did. Now, that was bad, but then it got worse. Soros's group, Media Matters, had a meeting in Florida, and what the SPLC said, and they were the key person on the program, said, it's not enough to shame these people. We need to drive them out of business. Bang, in short order. YouTube demonetized me, took my $12 million view down. Google, when you Google political Islam now, you only got 2/3 of the results were blown away. Facebook, of course, shadow banned me. PayPal dropped me. Why, I don't know. I violated something called terms and conditions. Who knows what those were? I got a registered letter from a high-powered copyright firm in Manhattan who said I couldn't use the MasterCard logo. MailChimp made it worse by all of a sudden saying that they could ban somebody that was paying for their mail delivery service, which I put my newsletters on. They could do it if they wanted to, and they wouldn't give you your contacts back. Well, I use MailChimp. So now then, every time we send out a newsletter, we back up all of our contacts because we don't know it'll be taken off. GoDaddy, a registrar of names, is just suddenly taking off people they don't like. So I now live in a world on the edge of a precipice. My FBI papers, I used to write white papers for the FBI. They were purged as well. I do have one point of pride. I know somebody who was involved in the purge of the FBI records under Obama. And they said, mine was the last one to be purged because there was the man said, look, these are just statistical analysis of how many words on a subject. And the Muslim Brotherhood guy said, it offends Islam, take them down. Then protesters started showing up inside my lectures and outside. Life was getting exciting. A conservative group at Vanderbilt University, which is here in town in Tennessee, where I went to undergraduate, and I used to be proud of that, got invited to give a lecture by this conservative group. So I chose a good topic, I thought, a statistical analysis of Islam's fundamental text. Well, I gave the lecture. When the lecture was over, a man stood up in the back of the room and started screaming at me in the top of his voice, you're a racist, you're a hater, you're a bigot. Again, not an Islamophobe because it wasn't there yet. And then he started repeating himself over and over again, thrusting his finger at me. And he says, what is the implied racism about that sign behind you? And it was the name of the conservative group in black letters on white paper. I was like, this guy's off the rails. All of a sudden, but I didn't say anything because I found when people are doing these kind of things, they will inevitably finally stop to inhale. He stopped to inhale and the person stepped in the room and says, the room has to be emptied, another lecture has to come in here. So a little part of the story, there was a young Jewish lady there who was a friend of my good friends, and she had come to hear me. She knew what positions I had on Islam, and there was a little queasiness. She was young. But she walked over to the man who was standing at the door to waylay me, and she said to the man who turned out to be the head of the Middle East department, she said, you know, you came to my Judaism 101 class and said that Islam had a special place for Jews. She said, I want to hear what the story between Muhammad and the Jews was. He says, oh, these conservatives. She says, I don't want to hear about conservatives. I want to hear about Muhammad. He turned on his heel and left. Now then, why do they censor us? Simple. My wife, who is an internet researcher, taught me this about reading on the web. Scan the article and read the comments. When you read the comments in the early days, you had those who knew something about Islam, you had Muslims, and the left. Well, what happened was, over a period of time, we beat everybody at the debate game. And so finally, they just sort of stopped coming on, except the left would pop in and say, oh, all religions are bad. So therefore, the reason we're censored is they cannot out-debate us, and so they deplatform us. Now let's talk about freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is our most human quality. If you can no longer talk about what you think and feel, you're not really human. Without freedom of speech, there is no freedom of press, there's no freedom of religion. It's key to what we'll be able to do. It's how we change governments, it's how we change everything, is by free speech. It is the intellectual foundation of our civilization. It is so important. We have two cornerstones. Critical thought, and the other is the golden rule. Between, we have the foundation for our intellectual world, and we have the foundation for our ethical world. And that is what's being taken away. If we don't have facts and reason, what do we have left? We have riots, assassinations, screaming, burning, and force. I want to read you here something from a professor. I get regular invites to debate on various platforms. I always say no, because debate, translation, critical thought, is an imperialist, capitalist, white supremacist, cis, heteropatriarchal technique that transforms a potential exchange of knowledge into a tool of exclusion and oppression. That's what her students would be like as citizens. So free speech is critical, and we're losing it, particularly in the universities. Now, the standard censorship is what I call deplatforming. As a matter of fact, other people use the word as well. You just simply can't talk. But there's also an invisible censorship. Let me give you an example. General Stanley McChrystal was the head general in Afghanistan, and he wrote a paper on how to win the war in Afghanistan. Well, I got a redacted copy of this, which means it had no dates, no places, no names, but I was looking for 3 words, and I found not one of these 3 words: jihad, Islam, Muslim. Now, how are you going to win in Afghanistan without knowing what the doctrine is that drives them to go to war? Here's another one. 90% of the professors at Vanderbilt University are left of center. So where's the conservative viewpoint going to be found? Well, it won't, will it? You're censored without knowing it. In Tennessee, the textbooks now used in our high schools say that the high point of human existence was the Islamic Golden Age. They also say that Islam was the first to give women their rights. And so what are you going to do when you take a test? Oh, and they also say that Christians, Jews, and Muslims all belong to the same family of Abraham religion. So imagine you're a high school student in Tennessee and you take a test. And one of the questions on the test is, are Islam, Christianity, and Judaism members of the family of Abraham? And you say no, because they're not. You will be graded by the state as being wrong. This is censorship. I spoke with a lawyer who taught at the law school at Vanderbilt. She taught Sharia law. So I had a cup of coffee with her. I said, what do you teach about women's issues, and what do you teach about jihad? She says, I don't teach that at all. I said, what do you teach? She says, we teach business law, Sharia business law. So I asked her a few more questions, and she didn't know Sharia from Shinola, Sunnah from Tuna. So here we have at a so-called top university, we have someone who is teaching Sharia and knows nothing. This is a form of censorship. I saw a doctor on the web who is a member of thousands of groups of MDs who wanted to talk about the COVID virus. Well, he came to England to talk about it, and when he spoke in England, they arrested him. A friend of mine who's an FBI agent, retired, spoke with some young FBI agents, and he said, don't you want to know about political Islam? And they said, oh no. Why? Because if we use anything about Islam in the FBI, it'll hurt our career. Then we have another form of censorship, the New York Times. Their motto, all the news is fit to print. Good luck. I've read several of their articles on Islam, and the only part of Islam they tell is what they would call the nice part. And think of all the things we can't discuss: political Islam, race, gender, immigration, and climate change, and that's just a short list. Because now then, if you speak on these issues, it's not that you're wrong, you're immoral, you're a bigot. Now today, the sword cuts against conservatives, the sword of censorship cuts against conservatives and libertarians. But censorship is totalitarian. The day will come when it'll cut in the other direction too. And the First Amendment, which is supposed to protect us, is just an invitation to a legal battle, which I cannot afford to pay. Now, here's the really bad news. What we're doing will not work, because right now we're using the method of heroes. People like Annie here are heroes, intellectual warriors, but we cannot defeat an army with heroes. Warriors don't defeat armies, and we're trying to do that. Now, we have some incredible people, but we need to have groups. Islam has roughly 1,400 Muslim Brotherhood groups in the United States. Our problem is we have wonderful individuals, but using them is like herding cats. Worse than that, it's like herding tigers. And who would run such an operation anyway? I couldn't imagine a Kafir Pentagon with top-down running a war. And besides that, when you have top-down management, even if you have a lot of money, you have a problem. And that problem is it can't come up with clever ideas at the grassroots level. Let me give you one of the most clever ideas I know about. Steve Amundsen is in California. And in California, it turns out, at the shopping mall and the food courts, it is considered a free speech area. So Steve takes a simple card table, 3 foot by 3 foot, with folding legs and a handful of brochures, several thousand brochures, and goes to the shopping mall. He hands out brochures about Islam. Incredible. Such a cheap, easy idea, but it wouldn't come with that with big thinking. So we need to acknowledge the genius and knowledge of all Kafirs. We need to develop a new community software, which I call KafirNet. Now, what would happen with KafirNet is this, is you'd have a member profile that's a data page. So everyone who joins up with KafirNet would have their whole profile, what their interests are, what their skills are. For instance, maybe you have the skill of being able to edit. I get requests for editing. So wouldn't it be nice to be able to go to KafirNet and find somebody who would edit your material and therefore be on your side when they're doing the editing? So you'd have interest, things you want to work on, programs, and you would be able to form teams by contacting the kind of people you want to contact. If you want to work with Christians who are persecuted, you'd be able to find people who are interested in dealing in KafirNet because of their profile, that they dealt with women, religion, or whatever else. So if you needed an editor, you'd go to KafirNet. You could create your own project and then send out an email to the group you want so that you could get help with it. Now this KafirNet is under development and is the second stage of what a program we're working on. Our first stage was developed over a 6-year period in Europe, CSPI International, and we're bringing it to the United States now. CSPI International will teach scientific methodology, language, research, and education and administration. Using the right words is incredible, and you need to use a scientific approach. We want CSPI International to be in all 50 states because we want somebody at every state capital so that we can do lobbying with a national impact. We think that Islam is a global threat and demands an international solution. If you're interested in this, just contact me on politicalislam.com, contact us. So that's where I see we are in the United States here and the rest of the world. We're losing our most precious freedom, the freedom of speech, which means the freedom of ideas, really the freedom of life. I don't know what we're going to do about it. We're proposing a solution which would create an army, an intellectual army, so that our heroes would have an army behind them, because that's what we need. So that's where I stand on censorship in the 21st century. It's one of the worst problems we have politically, and I don't think we can survive unless we deal with it. Thank you, Annie.
Not that I wasn't aware of everything you just explained, but when you hear it again out loud, the first thing I remember is when you said no freedom of speech. It's interesting that if you live in an Islamic country like I did, actually freedom of speech, the lack of freedom of speech is way more obvious than freedom of religion. Not that freedom of religion exists, but under certain circumstances, you can become a second-class citizen. But as far as freedom of speech goes, absolutely zero. And it feels like they're already doing that. Well, of course, for now, it's only with conservatives and, of course, ex-Muslims. But gradually, it's going to literally take over and become it, where there is just absolutely zero room to say anything against or bad about Islam. Am I correct?
Yes. And when you don't have freedom of speech, Annie, you really don't have a real life, or at least that's my opinion, because you can't have thoughts that involve other people. So freedom of speech isolates us as individuals. It's harmful to us. It's harmful to the nation, and it's harmful to our civilization. I really don't see how we can survive if we lose freedom of speech, and it is definitely, from my personal experience, under attack.
Agreed. I can vouch for that. I've said this a few times before, that the first thing Islam takes away from you is your humanity. Growing up, somebody actually once asked me, how do you do videos that are like 2 or 3 minutes and it's filled with information? You're very good at getting to the point short and quick. And I said, growing up, where I grew up, I knew for a fact I had 10 to 15 seconds to say what I wanted to say to my father before he would shut me down. So automatically as a child, I developed the habit of getting to the point quickly before I'm shut down. And that's exactly how you grow up in Islamic countries. You either are like me and still take that 10, 15 seconds to say it, or you just don't say it. And then the pretenders start to catch up with you. There's a point where you hate yourself because you're acting to be someone that you're not.
I could not imagine such a thing. But now I'm real keen on saying what I think. But I think that everybody should be able to say what they think. Why should the government or anybody else tell me, or the big tech giants? Why should Facebook tell me what I cannot think about and talk about? I don't understand that. As a matter of fact, I'm rather radical on free speech. I'm for hate speech. Now that sounds like a dreadful thing to say. But by that I mean, what we've done is define hate now as something that offends a protected minority. Well, sometimes we all need some criticism, and yet what we're saying is you can't criticize at all. My grandmother was very forthright in her speech, and she's the one who taught me to say what I thought and mean what I say. So this is something very precious and dear to my heart.
That's understandable. Let me go ahead and start reading some of the questions as we promised to our audience to answer. So the first question says, the speech censorship is scary, but they are taking it to the next level by taking away people's jobs and bank accounts. That's terrifying. How can we stop these attacks?
Well, I come back to the fact that we have to move from the age of heroes to organized groups. Because, see, when I started out in this game, I thought that you could tell people the truth and they would go out and do something. That's about 1% of the population. So we need some way that we can put groups behind us and groups to work with us so that we have support and ease. Because one person can't do it all no matter how hard they work. I mean, I work night and day and I'm not getting the job done, I'll tell you that. So we have to have groups that are organized. Now that's a vague answer because I can't point you to the group. We're trying to build one now. But it's very serious. I mean, people lose their jobs because of a comment they make on Facebook. This is cruel and inhuman. Why can't we have opinions? Why is it that no one can be offended? And by the way, try to offend me. I just go, whatever. Remember, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That's really true. But we need to be able to protect people, and their jobs should be secure, but even if they have the wrong political ideas. So I don't have a real answer that you can go out and do tomorrow. But we need to understand, first off, it's something that's being taken away from us. We're losing our very humanity.
Agreed. And don't give up until the groups are created and trained. I guess what I'm trying to say is just because they're censoring us doesn't mean we need to stop talking. We can still speak out, even though they're censoring us, correct?
I'm not shutting up. I'll put it that way.
Right there with you. Okay, next question is going to take us to systematic racism. So it says Muslims own Black as slaves across North Africa, such as Algeria, Libya, Nigeria, and Sudan. I can say also in the Middle East, in my motherland, they own Black slaves. So the question is, even though no one has abused Blacks like Muslims, starting from Muhammad time, and how there's actual systematic racism within Islam, but nobody's talking about it. How can we wake people up, especially, Black people, into the dangers that Islam will bring to their lives?
Now this, I think we can deal a little bit more with, because Race is one of the biggest questions in the United States. And yet I find that I taught for 8 years at a black university. And no one there had any idea that every slave that came to America was wholesaled by a Muslim slaver. I was astounded by the ignorance. Now, this is something we can push to the forefront. And I think we ought to try to do that because it's such a sensitive issue. A brilliant man on this subject and a great hero is Charles Jacobs. But here's an example. Francis Bach, who works with Charles Jacobs, I Abolish, came to Vanderbilt University to speak on being a slave. And I thought, whoa, this is fabulous. I don't mean that being a slave was fabulous, but I'll get to hear a former slave talk. So I went to the talk. There were maybe 30 people at the talk. And of them, I don't think there were more than 4 or 5 who were Black Americans. There were more white Americans than Black Americans. So what I learned from that is that Blacks do not want to know about slavery and Islam. No matter how cruel and unusual a punishment it is, they don't want to talk about it. Now this we can, as individuals with a keyboard and a mouse, we can begin to push this idea forward because we need to talk about slavery, because we need to know that everybody who came to the West as slaves came through an Arab slave trader. And of course, do you know when slavery was abolished in Saudi Arabia? 1962. And by the way, an oddity here, the highest priced woman in the Meccan slave market, which we have records for 1,400 years, was always a white woman. I leave it to your imagination as to why she brought such a high price, but let me give you the answer. Muhammad's favorite sex slave was a white woman. So therefore, the best sex slave is a white woman. So we need to bring slavery to the issue, to the point where it's talked about. And we can push this issue, and it's something we can do without a huge army behind us. We can do it as individuals. Talk to our friends, because we need to talk about the reality and truth of slavery. It's a horrible thing. Of course, it was something that all people did. I like to say that the reason that slavery was ended was not because of our high moral purpose. We had that, but also we invented a better machine, which was mechanics, steam engines, and other things. Because it turns out to get much money out of slaves, you have to be really brutal to treat them that way. So slavery is an issue we have to bring to the forefront of ideas because it's important. Black Lives Matter needs to be preaching the doctrine of slavery as well. But today, instead of looking for reparations from the white man, they need to also be asking for reparations from the slave traders in Nigeria and all the way along the West Coast. And Islam traded slaves not only on the West Coast, but on the Mediterranean coast and the East Coast. Muhammad had slaves. He had black slaves, white slaves, Arab slaves, eunuchs. He had all kinds of slaves. So we need to teach about Muhammad and slavery. As a matter of fact, I think we need to teach everything about Muhammad's life. I have a talk, by the way, about Islamic slavery. It's somewhere rattling around on my YouTube channel, Political Islam.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up. And yes, let's say we try to get Francis' book to speak. Next question is actually the same question as mine, which is the biggest problem censorship is on one hand. I agree. We are definitely facing a lot of censorship. But I can say between 2017 and 2018, hitting the road, going to many different speaking engagements, my audience has started shrinking. It wasn't because of censorship anymore. It was the fear. I was in Minnesota. I had a speaking engagement. There was a bombing attack, a bombing threat on the church. Police knocked at the door, said, "We can't help you. You're on your own." And pretty much half of the church emptied out. People are afraid to show up in person or even online to support the movement. How do we fix that problem, Dr. Warner? How do we tell people to stop being afraid and show up?
It's a very old-fashioned word, but since I'm an old man, I use old-fashioned words. We used to call it gumption. A strange word, perhaps, but men having some backbone. We need to take responsibility for our own ethical situation, and to be a coward in the face of such things. Now, you don't need to be stupid, but to be a coward is simply a poor ethical choice. And more than that, I don't know what to say. I see the entire nation being ruled by fear now. I'm struck by this. For so long, we were so secure. Even in the middle of world wars, we were secure. We had our civilization under our feet as a foundation. But now then we don't seem to have much of anything. So I don't know how to answer your question other than to point out to somebody you're being a coward, which I consider a curse. So, but I don't have any real answer here other than that.
Yeah, I agree. There is no answer. It's the only thing I can say is between Black Lives Matter movement, Antifa, Islam, socialism, all of that, I just always remember what I was taught as a child, what Muhammad said. And that was heaven is under the shadow of the sword. That's how Islam goes forward, by fear. Is there a chance that they might bomb the place and we all might blow up? Yes, there's a chance. But honestly, it's the same chance as me walking out of here getting hit by a car.
We're not afraid of being in a car, and yet it's one of the best ways to die, or most common ways to die. I don't know if this is the best. But
I understand, but our circumstances are anything but common or usual. We are literally at war for not just our lives, but freedom, liberty, the next generation. I'm sure you share the frustration of why can't people just understand that?
Annie, there's a lot of things I don't understand. I just put one foot in front of the other, and when the morning comes, I start to work. That sounds like a dull choice, but it's the only choice I know how to make.
I know. I sometimes have to do the same thing. There is a question about Candace Owens. It says, is Candace Owens correct that we have reached a point where compromise with the left is no longer possible?
I went to hear Candace Owens speak, and my daughter said to me, says, "Dad, I will kill you if you don't get a picture of me with Candace, of yourself with Candace Owens." And so I went up to her after the lecture and I said, "Would you like to save a life?" And she looked at me like, "What?" Says, "My daughter's going to kill me if I don't get a selfie with you." She says, "Sure." Now there's a hero. She really is. The most amusing thing about race and her is she's been called a white supremacist. Now then, I've laughed at my own jokes, and I've forgotten what the direct question was about. Oh, Candace Owens is right. There comes a point at which you cannot compromise anymore. Otherwise, you're backing yourself off the cliff. And I think we have reached that point. The left now is in such powerful control over the United States and its ideas, is that we can't take a step back. We must take a step forward. So that's my answer. And other than that, I love Candace Owens. She's gutsy, my kind of woman.
Yes, we need a lot more Candace Owens out there. Seriously, and that's when the entire hypocrisy started, as you said. You know, Candace Owens is called a white supremacist. I am called an Islamophobe, which my answer, as you know, is always, I mean, it's not a phobia. I literally lost 18 years of my life, and to this day deal with a lot of harm that came my way when I was a child, and they still think it's just a phobia. But that's what they do. The left does the hypocrisy of, if you don't match my narrative, I will label you. And as you said, I tell people too, who cares? Let them call you whatever they want to call you. It's okay. What they call me, what they call you, what they call other people doesn't make us who we are. What we do with our life makes us who we are. But again, it goes back to, I guess nowadays people are sensitive to what they're being called.
When anyone calls me an Islamophobe, I ask them, what is this Islam that I'm supposed to be phobic about? I steer the whole conversation over to Muhammad and Allah. The reason I like to do that is they don't know squat about Muhammad or Allah. So now then they have to defend themselves on a subject area they don't understand. I don't deal with the phobia, I deal with Muhammad and Allah. But of course, that's what I deal with all the time.
Exactly. Now let me ask you this. Who is Muhammad?
There's two answers. Well, there's several answers to this question. The historical answer is we have no proof of his existence. He's a man who's all powerful in history, and yet we don't find any trace of him when he was alive. Supposed to be alive. Now then, I'm going to give you another answer. That is, I'm going to accept what is given as Muhammad in the Sirah, the autobiography of Muhammad, not autobiography, the biography of Muhammad. And in the Sirah, we need to understand this. There are two different Muhammads. There's the Muhammad who preached the religion of Islam in Mecca and converted about 150 people in 13 years. That's about 10 a year. But he was a failure at teaching the religion of Islam. They ran him out of town where he went to Medina. And in Medina, he became a politician and a jihadist. And I'm not making this up. This is clearly spelled out in the Sirah. So, as a jihadist and a politician, he became an absolute and complete success. So the two Muhammads, the one who was a failure was a religious teacher, and the one who was successful was a jihadist and a politician. So which of the two Muhammads do you want to talk about? Well, of course, if they want to convert you to Islam, the first they tell you about Muhammad in Mecca. They don't introduce you to Muhammad in Medina until you're all the way on board. They call it a matter of gradual revelation. So personally, I don't think Muhammad existed. The historical proof is not there. There's too many things that go against it. But I accept his existence so I can talk with Muslims and others who have heard the story of Muhammad. So it's a complicated answer, but he's a complicated man.
I'm so glad you brought that up. If you don't mind me sharing a quick track with the story. I was at a school and we were taught about no-nos in Islam. And
what?
No-nos, things that we are never ever to do.
Right.
Of course, the very first one was you'll never ever question words of Allah. That was the first thing we had to learn. But came fifth or sixth one was you're never allowed to draw a picture of Muhammad. And the first question I asked, which earned me a couple of days of suspension from the school, was, so is this why there is absolutely no trace of his existence? Because nobody was ever allowed to draw him? We don't even know how he looks like, and there are different explanation and description of him in the history. That's always been a question for me. Why is it that nobody's allowed to have any imagination of Muhammad's face? You're right.
I never thought about that. I think it's so odd that Islam basically crushes all art. Sculpture, painting, symphony. I think who is the Khomeini, when asked about Beethoven, had never heard of him. Didn't even know the man existed. That's a great loss. For himself as well, I might add. But of course, he also said there was no humor in Islam. And as a guy who likes to crack wise and make jokes, I'm like, I don't want any of that. Life is too short. I need to make some jokes on the way through it. Thank you. Goodbye.
Well, but the general picture of it is in Islam, when either reading Quran or reading Hadith, the bottom line is, first of all, a human being is nothing but a slave to Allah. Allah refers to his creation as a slave, including the word abid,
right,
which is a slave to Allah, a devout Muslim. The bottom line is you're not supposed to enjoy life. You're not supposed to be happy. You're not nothing except Allah, prayer, and Muhammad is allowed to make you feel good about life. With that being said, there is no music. There is no instruments. There is no drawing. There is just nothing that can build up in your spiritual happiness. They literally tell you, no, you can't be happy. And that's another part of being miserable. It's not just about 72 versions. They don't blow themselves up to go get to 72 versions promised. Some of them do. But Islam does drive you to the point of you have nothing to live for. You have a lot to die for. That's the biggest thing about Islam.
That's cruel. I never thought about it in that direction. You have nothing to live for and something to die for.
I've been there. There was a time in my life that I felt that I have a lot to die for. I was about 13 when I felt like dying is a lot more rewarding than living a life.
You know, I'm remembering what one scholar at Al-Azhar University said. He says the laws of apostasy, that is, threatening to kill people who leave Islam, is the only reason that Islam is still in existence. And I thought to myself, even if I believe that, I would never say it in public. That's about the worst description I've ever heard of a life philosophy, that you can't leave it. Of course, if I may be bold to say here, something you can't leave is also called a cult. But the idea that you can't freely go in and out, I mean, you would want to think that you had a religion or any other life philosophy that was so attractive that you wanted more of it, not less of it. And yet the fear factor is the main thing, as you say.
Yes, there are, every time somebody says, are you telling me 1.6 billion Muslims are all these? And I'm like, hold on, right there we have a wrong number. There is no such a thing as 1.6 billion Muslims. There isn't. Islamic Republic of Iran's population as of right now is close to 81 million people. 81. Out of 81 million, I promise you, 65 million of them are only Muslim, because if not, they will be killed. You can't calculate that number. You can't put that into the 1.6. Same thing applies to Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Egypt and Kuwait and Qatar. All of the Islamic countries, when you're born, you're stamped a Muslim. That's where the 1.6 billion comes from.
I know this. I've heard Muslims say who apostatize, that is, left Islam, say that there are an awful lot of people in America that we think are Muslim, but they're actually Muslim apostates, but they don't want to leave in public.
Exactly. I have actually dealt with many cases in Los Angeles, California. One member of the family was done with it, but they were too afraid to come out, which actually, I'm glad this came up because I had this question for you. So I understand they're censoring a lot. And I know you agree with me that the vocabulary that's being used is very wrong. A lot of words are being removed. Muslims, jihad, Islam, all of that is being removed. But one thing I can't get over is when, based on actual reports by FBI and Homeland Security, there are average of 24 to 36 honor killings taking place in America every year. But none of them are being called honor killings. Don't you think that matters?
You know, we were talking earlier about people not having courage. One of the groups of people in America that don't have courage are the so-called feminists. Honor killing is the worst possible feminist doctrine you can have. And yet, we don't find that people speak out about it who are otherwise very critical of, say, white supremacist males in our society. But if you're a Muslim and kill your own daughter because she wore blue jeans that were too tight, they don't have anything to say about that. These are serious issues. I was raised by two women, my mother and my grandmother. I had two daughters. I'm very sensitive to how women are treated in our society. I love women of all ages and all kinds. But the way that Islam treats women is abhorrent. I mean, I went through the Quran and counted up all the verses that praise women, and it's only because they're being mothers, and all the verses that are neutral about women, and then all the verses that subjugate women. And roughly 80% of the verses that deal with women subjugate them. So I don't want women to be subjugated. I know women who are free and happy, and I love them the way they are. I don't want them to be crushed. And I certainly don't want them to be killed because of something that they said about a boyfriend or something else. So our feminists need to speak out. But where are they? I don't know. As a matter of fact, again, you can go through other people that should speak out, and yet they do not. Christians should speak out against the persecuted church. Blacks should speak out against slavery. But Islam, it rules with such fear, and awesome fear, actually, that people are quiet. So we need a lot more people like you and me, Annie, who are willing to say what needs to be said. Because I'm looking towards the end of my life, but I can say this: I stood for those who are weak, and I stood for those who are persecuted. And everyone else needs to do the same. This is not some high moral purpose. This is just being an ordinary person. How could we stand by and see people so brutally treated? I cannot do that.
I agree. I wish more people would speak out. And I wish a lot of social workers who are running into houses of those who are not agreeing with their 6, 7, 8-year-old children going into transgender classes to take them away, they would actually run to Minnesota and save those girls who went through female genital mutilation by a Muslim doctor in America. I don't remember any of those groups running to save those children, those little girls. And again, This is America. I understand sometimes people tell me my story is old and far. Yes,
Old.
I had Americans tell me, listen, what happened to you breaks my heart, but your story is far and old. All the rest of them are not old, they're not far. They're here in America, recent. So it's not about how old the story is, and it's not about how you recover from it, and it doesn't matter where it's taking place. The bottom line is when you wake up every morning, whatever your faith might be, you were all created equally. And you want to talk about equal rights? Every single little girl between age of 6 and 8 that was mutilated in that clinic in America should have equal rights to be saved.
I knew a woman who was a surgical nurse, and they saw their first person from some part in Africa who had full FGM, and she was under anesthesia, and they called everybody they could into the OR to look at this woman. They could not even understand the anatomy, the way it was working. She was horrified, but nothing was said or done. As a matter of fact, she went ahead to say that the way law is, we're supposed to put them back just together like they were. But she says, I did not recognize her as being as a female, actually, with what I saw.
Yeah, cover up. It just seems easier. It's a lot easier for Madonna to go on a stage and about blowing up the White House than for her to spend 1/10 of her fortune to maybe save some innocent girls who are being sold to marriage here in America or who are being mutilated here in America, right?
I want to speak to the woman who can justify FGM. I would like to actually meet such a person, including Madonna, because, I mean, how abhorrent can something get before we say that's wrong? But, oh my goodness, they're a protected minority. I can't say that FGM is wrong because that would offend. Some people would even argue that fighting against FGM is like some form of bigotry and hatred. We're supposed to, all cultures are supposed to be the same. Where did that crap come from? A culture that removes the clitoris from a woman is not equal to one who sees health as a sexy life. That didn't come out quite right, not sexy life, but a full sexual life. I'll make that sound right in some way and garble it, sorry.
No, I understood it. But yes, unfortunately, you're right. We need more people to speak out, and I don't mean we need more, I call them keyboard ninjas. I mean physically, we need to get out there. And I'm not advertising new violence. I'm talking about showing up to peaceful rallies, showing up to webinars, showing up to seminars, whatever it takes to get educated. One thing you need to know, I'm sure you can agree with me, Dr. Warners, if you don't read the Sirah and the Quran, you don't have what it takes to debate these people. They will twist it so easily, you lose the debate.
As a matter of fact, I tell my students, don't start with the Quran at all. Even if you're trying to educate someone else, you want to start with Muhammad. The reason is anyone can understand Muhammad because he's a man. But understanding Allah, well, that gets a little like woo, 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 and what do you say? So the thing about reading the Sirah is this. It's a fascinating story. You have spies, counter spies, torture, rape, sex slavery, slaves, deceptions, battles, assassinations. It is a great story. Now that I didn't say I support Muhammad, but what I'm saying is it's like a Hollywood movie. So to read about Muhammad and the Sirah is not a dull project at all. Now the reading the original is kind of heavy lifting, but that's the reason I and others have made the Sirah easy to understand.
That's very true. Okay, we do have time for one more question. Let's go with this one. Does having Muslims in law enforcement discourages Muslim women from leaving Islam in the USA because it might not be safe?
Now, since I've already been called a bigot, let me establish my bigotry with this answer. I do not think that the law enforcement or the military should accept Muslims. The reason is we differ basically on the fundamentals of law. Our Constitution is not the fundamental law for a Muslim because it violates the Sharia. So if you don't really support our Constitution, I don't think you should be involved in defending it because you can't really do the job. And I agree with you. If a Muslim police officer shows up at the door and a woman has been beaten by her husband, he's not going to do anything because verse 4, is it 34 or 24, says you have the right to beat your husband.
34.
34? I always get that confused. And every time I say, why don't I remember that right? I don't know. But anyway, he would not want to take her down to the police station. You're supposed to take the husband down to the police station, but he would never do it. A Muslim does not support our legal system because their legal system is the Sharia. And the Sharia says you can beat your wife. And it says a lot of other things too, none of which are complimentary to women, I might add.
No, not at all. Okay, here's my personal last question. Dr. Bill Warner, please tell all of our audience, where do they go to learn everything you're putting out there and get more educated and keep up with your upcoming program?
Go to www.politicalislam.com. I've got more books than you can read, and it's not just books. Remember, I sell an education system.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Warner. It was a privilege and an honor for me personally, and thanks for sharing your wisdom with us.
Oh, well, thank you. You're a great person and you're doing a great work. Thank you ever so much for your courage.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And to our lovely audience who has stayed with us until now, thank you so much. And remember, these webinars are brought to you by the Glazov Gang and David Horowitz Freedom Center for free. So if you'd like to support these webinars, consider going to frontpagemag.com and make 100% tax-deductible donation. Until next week, you all stay safe and goodbye.